Did you ever feel unnecessary? Y'all are having such a good time, I'm afraid to preach. I'm afraid I'll slow you down. That's a good song. That's sort of scriptural. You say, well, I did come to Jesus. Yes, but only after he had come to you. Talking with a woman one time, she was struggling with this matter of forgiving someone. She said, if this person will come to me and say they're sorry, apologize, I'll forgive them. She said, there's no unforgiveness in my heart. She said, I'm ready to forgive. Said, after all, the Lord didn't forgive me until I went to him and said I was sorry. I said, is that right? She said, that's right. I said, well, I recollect reading somewhere where he was the lamb slain from the foundations of the world, and that he chose us in him before the foundation of the earth, and that while we were yet sinning, he died for us. He said, the only reason you were able to finally go to him and apologize is because, first of all, he had come to you and with his forgiveness. Spurgeon said, I know that God had to call me, because if it had been left up to me, I would never have called him. Man is dead in sins and trespasses, and last time I checked, dead man couldn't do anything. He couldn't move. He couldn't believe. He couldn't do anything. The old theologians used to speak of prevenient grace. That's the grace of God that comes to a man before he's saved, that enables him to be saved. And that's good doctrine, whether it's Calvinist or what. I want you to open your Bibles tonight to the Gospel of Luke chapter 15. We're going to read what has been called the world's greatest short story. There are some passages that are like these exotic flowers. They're beautiful until the human hand touches them, and the moment the human hand touches them, they wilt. There are some verses and passages in the Bible that you just feel like anything I say about it's going to take away from it. And this story is one of those, but having said that, I'm going to lay my hand on it and touch it and trust that the Lord will keep it from wilting. In Luke chapter 15, in the opening verses of this chapter, the Lord is having one of his controversies with the Pharisees. He didn't like the company he was keeping. It bothered them that the Lord approved of people they disapproved of. And he was constantly receiving publicans and sinners, and they could not understand that. And so he gave a string of 3 parables illustrating the Father's love, and illustrated in the fact of the man that had the 100 sheep and one was lost, the woman that had the 10 pieces of silver and one was lost, and the father who had 2 sons. This is a parable not of the prodigal son, even though we call it that. It is a parable of the Father's heart. What Jesus is talking about here and trying to reveal is not so much a son who got into trouble, but the Father's love for his wayward children. And so we'll begin reading in verse 11 and read through verse 24. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. And they began to be merry. Now there's something that has always puzzled me about this fellow. It says in verse 14, And when he had spent everything he had, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. It would seem that the most natural thing for that young man to do when he had spent everything he had and was perhaps on the brink of starvation and began to be in want, that he would go and join himself to his father, that he would go back home. But instead of turning to his father, who loved him and had all of the things that the son needed, he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country. It was easier for him to go deeper into the world than it was to go back home. Easier to go to a stranger than it was to go to his father. Now I know that this parable is illustrating God's love for the sinner, the lost man. But I think there are certain principles here that apply whether you're saved or lost. And I want to tell you something. When you get out of fellowship with God, sometimes it's easier to go deeper into the world than it is to come back home. Sometimes it's easier to go to a stranger and still try to satisfy the need than it is to go to the Father. Most logical thing would be to return to our Father. But it's hard to do that. I said last night that it's easy to get away from God, but it's not all that easy to get back to Him. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. I believe that the very moment I come to God and confess my sins, at that moment I am forgiven. I believe that with all my heart. I believe He casts my sins behind His back, and He will remember them against us no more. And I think as far as the east is from the west, that's how far He has separated our sins from us. I believe that with all my heart, but I'm telling you tonight that once a person has known what it is to be in the Father's house and have fellowship with the Father and know the power of God in his life and know the sweet presence of the Holy Spirit in his spirit, for that person to have sinned against God and have slipped and gone back into the world, maybe not into the obvious wicked world, but into the worldly spirit of his own heart, it's not always easy to come back. God forgives us the very moment we do. He doesn't put us on any kind of penance. He doesn't ask us to go and do 10 dozen things, and after we've done that, then He'll consider whether or not to forgive us. His forgiveness is not conditioned upon anything but His own grace and mercy. But the problem is not with God, but it's with us. Very hard to come back. Many of us tonight can think back and remember times when we were closer to the Lord than we are now. We can remember when there was a greater consciousness of God's presence and there was a more powerful exercise in our lives of God's power. And for some reason or another, and regardless of how desperately we long to come back to that former place, it seems hard to get back. I think sometimes it is easier to win a lost person than it is to reclaim a backslider. I think it's easier for a lost person to be saved than it is for a backslider to get right. The most miserable person in all the world is that fellow who's out of fellowship with God. He's sort of like a man with no country. He's between a rock and a hard place. The devil can't have him, doesn't want him. God can't fellowship with him. God doesn't know what to do with him, really. He can't abandon him because he's bound to him by his word, but he can't fellowship with him and bless him because his sins are separating him. And he's in no man's land. He can't get any enjoyment out of the world. The Bible says that no man gave unto him. No, sir. When you're away from the Father, there's not anybody out there, folks, that can help you. And God can't help you because you won't let Him, because our sins have separated us. All the time this boy was in the far country, his father was at home waiting for him with a T-bone steak and warm bed and new set of clothes. But you see, this is what Jude says when he tells us to keep ourselves within the love of God. You mean it's possible for us to get outside the love of God? No, not in the sense that there's nothing I can do that can make God love me any less, and there's nothing I can do that can make God love me any more. But I need to keep myself where God can bless me. I need to keep myself within the sunshine of His love. The sun is always shining, but I can get outside of that sunshine and never feel its warmth. He says, you keep yourselves in the love of God. You keep yourselves in a position where God can show that love, where God can demonstrate that love. Now, I think the reason that this boy had a difficult time coming back to his father, why it was easier to join himself to a citizen than to join himself to his father, is the same reason that some of us have a difficult time of coming back to God. The basic problem was he had an inadequate view of his father. I'm convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt that our greatest need tonight is to have an adequate and accurate revelation of God. I believe that we could trace all of our spiritual problems ultimately back to the fact that we just don't know the kind of God that we're serving. The psalmist said, they that know Thy name shall put their trust in Thee. And if we're not putting our trust in Him, it simply means we don't know His name. We don't know His nature. We don't really know what He's about. The one thing that God is after above everything else is to make Himself known. What God is after is to so reveal Himself so that men will know Him for what He really is. And I believe that once a man gets a glimpse, an adequate, accurate glimpse of Jesus Christ, there's no demon in hell that can keep him coming to the Father. But until we understand God for what He is, we'll never, never find that happy release that allows us to come back to Him as we want to. What I want to do with you tonight is examine what this boy said. He rehearsed the speech. And in that speech he said one right thing and two wrong things. And the two wrong things were the things that were making it difficult for him to come back to the Father. And I think there are things that make it difficult for us to believe that God can really forgive us. Even when God forgives us, we somehow feel like we're not forgiven. We still feel dirty. We still feel like God's holding it against us. So I just want us to look at this tonight and see what were these three things he said. One thing was correct, the other two things were wrong. He said in verse 17, he came to himself. And when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger. That's the first thing he said, and he was right. What he said was, my father's hired servants are getting along better than I am. And I have news for you tonight, folks. A lost man gets along better in this world than an out-of-fellowship Christian. It is better from the standpoint of getting along and being happy and making a go of it. It is better to be lost than it is to be a backslider. The Father's hired servants, those who aren't sons, get along a lot better than people who have turned their back upon the Father. He causes His rain to fall on the just and the unjust. You'll not find anywhere in the Scripture where God withholds His ordinary blessings from the unsaved. And this boy said, my Father's hired servants are getting along better than I am. I'm reminded of what the prophet said, the backslider shall be filled with all his ways. The way of the backslider is hard. I remember when my pastor years ago ordained me to the ministry, he said one thing that I've never really forgotten. He said, son, the most miserable place in all the face of the earth is right outside God's will. The most miserable place in all the earth is just one step outside God's will. Well, I want you to notice something. The Bible says that he spent everything. What is it that makes a Christian miserable? He says that he began to be in want. Suddenly there was an inner insufficiency. He filled himself, but he was still empty. There was a wanting. You know what was causing that? He said, my Father's hired servants fare better than I do. You see, the only person in that far country that missed the Father's house was the Son. Why? He was the only one who'd ever been there. What he was doing when he suddenly woke up one day and saw himself in a pig pen, and he was a nice little Jewish boy, there he was, feeding a bunch of hogs and eating hog slop. And you know what made it so painful? He remembered what it was like in the Father's house. He could remember what it was like. Perhaps one evening as the sun was going down and he was sitting over yonder trying to get away from the pigs and grabbing a husk here or two and stuffing himself and trying to make himself think it was something other than it was. Or maybe he thought, oh yeah, just about this time they're having supper at home. And you know, you could almost smell that calf cooking. And he could remember how it was to go into that house after a hard day's work and sit down with his father and his brother and fellowship, and that table full of food and the warmth of the love, and just eat the finest food that hands had ever prepared. You see, what made it so miserable was the fact that he remembered what it was like in the Father's house. You see, you never miss what you've never had, but once you've had it, friends, you'll never be happy any other way. There was a preacher out in West Texas some time ago, a few years ago, who had fallen into sin and had to leave the ministry. And one day a fellow preacher was talking with him. He said, what do you miss most? He said, you're no longer in the ministry. He said, what do you miss most? And the fellow said, I tell you what I miss most. I miss the trumpets every morning. There was a time when I awoke and there were trumpets because I was God's servant. He said, that's what I miss. There is a wanting. There is a wanting. And you know, and whether we like to admit it or not, this is a blessing. There's hope for a miserable backslider. You can't do anything with a fellow that's satisfied, and there are times when God just has to let us waste everything we have and come to the place where we are absolutely in want before we can see and remember what it was like in the Father's house. He was absolutely right in one thing he said, my Father's hired servants getting along better than I am. And I don't know where you are or what you are, but I'll tell you this tonight. The lost people in this community are enjoying life a lot better than you are if you're out of fellowship with God. Old Wayne McDill has a great little chapter in his book on evangelism in a tangled world. It's called Leave Us Happy Heathen Alone. I used to, when I would try to win people to Christ, I'd try to convince them they weren't happy. I was watching television last night, a friend of mine preaching, and he said, there's no happiness outside Jesus. He said, if you don't know Jesus, you're not happy. Well, I'm going to tell you something, that's not necessarily so. I know a lot of lost people that are happy. And I remember one time trying to win this old boy to the Lord, and I tried to convince him he wasn't happy. He kept telling me he was. I tried to convince him he didn't have any peace. He said he did. You said, well, he wasn't really happy, he just thought he was. Well, thinking you're happy is just as good as being happy, folks. I mean, what's the difference? I mean, you know, if I think I'm happy and I think I have peace, that's just as good as having it. There are a lot of happy heathen out there, but there's no such thing as a happy backslider. Person outside the will of God. Now you say, well, I'm out of the will of God, I'm a backslider and I'm happy. Friend, that just means you're one of the hired servants. You're not a son. If you can willfully, now you listen to me carefully, don't want anybody walking out of here misunderstanding what I'm saying. If you can willfully, deliberately, and knowingly sin against God and feel no conviction or compunction, that's a good sign you're not saved. Now I said willfully, deliberately, and knowingly. Now there are times when we sin unwillingly, unknowingly, and indeliberately, and there's no conviction. But when I knowingly, willingly, and deliberately go against the will of God, and there is no remorse, no conviction, no compunction, it's a pretty good sign I do not know Him. If you can be just as happy outside the will of God as you are inside the will of God, you're not saved. See? The Holy Spirit dwells in my heart as the convincer and convictor of sin. And when I willfully, knowingly, deliberately sin, He does His work. And He began to be in want. Well, that's the first thing He said that was right. Now we come to the two things He said that was wrong. He said, verse 18, I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before Thee. Now look at it, verse 19, and am no more worthy to be called Thy son. Now that's the first mistake he made. He said, I'm no more worthy to be called Thy son. You say, what are you getting at? Just this. He never was worthy. Whoever told him he was worthy to be called his father's son? Was he his father's son because he was worthy? Was he his father's son because he deserved it? Forgive me, but in case there's something I don't understand about the birth process, I don't think a child ever had any say-so in it. He didn't become his father's son because he excelled in some way, because he had more ability or talent. You see, the fact is, he never was worthy to be called his father's son. But something has happened. He has sinned against his father. He has failed miserably. And now there has come over him this feeling, I am no more worthy to be called Thy son. I've blown it. My sin has made me less worthy than I was before. Elijah had that same problem. You'll remember after that tremendous victory on Mount Carmel, and then he had his time of failure, and there he is under that tree, and he said, Oh God, let me die, for I am no better than my fathers. You see, there was a time when he thought he was better than his fathers. Well, I'm not as good as I used to be. And I want to tell you something. I talked to a Christian person not too long ago, a lady in a church who had not fallen into great sin, but had backslidden and fallen into the world. And you know what she said? She said, I no longer, she said, I know God's forgiven me. I know God's forgiven me. But I no longer feel worthy to teach a class or to pray. You ever felt that way? Sure you have. I know exactly what happens. Every time you get on your knees to pray, the old devil sidles up to you and reminds you of what you've done in the past and says, now you know that since you've done that, since you've said that, you're not worthy to pray. And one of the things that keeps us from coming back into full fellowship with the Father is we think somehow our sin has made us less worthy than we were before to be called God's servant, called God's son. I'm not worthy tonight to preach because of my sin, indicating that at one time I thought I was worthy. You see, what we need to understand, friends, is that when God saves us, He accepts us not because we are worthy, but because Jesus Christ is worthy. And that the Father forgives our sins for Jesus' sake, not for our sake. And we are accepted in the Beloved. Our acceptance is in Jesus Christ. And God doesn't bless us because we are more holy than our neighbor. I was reading a book of Acts some time ago, and I came across a little verse that just really caught my attention. You remember in Acts chapter 3, after Peter heals that lame man and the Pharisees jump on him and want to know what happened, Peter says, "Do not think that this man stands here before you whole. Do not think that we have healed this man by our name or by our holiness." Now that caught my attention, because you see, I've always been led to believe that if we aren't holy, God will not use us, but if we are holy, then God will use us, and the more holy we are, the more usable we are, and that the reason God blesses my ministry because I'm holy. And yet Peter says, we don't have this power to raise this man from his bed of affliction because of our holiness. But it's by the name and the power of Jesus Christ, you see. Not our holiness. If you've ever read the biography of J. Hudson Taylor, you'll remember that in his early years as a missionary, he had a great struggle. He felt unworthy. He had read and heard about this life of victory, this abundant life, and he kept trying to move into it. But the one thing that troubled him was he knew he was not a holy man. He had a goal of holiness, and he was never able to achieve it, and so there was this constant struggle, this constant effort, this constant reaching but never actually grabbing, this constant sense of failure because I'm not as holy as I ought to be. And he said one day as he was reading the Scripture, he came across that passage that said, "Christ is made unto us righteousness and wisdom and sanctification and holiness." And he said, I realize that Christ is my holiness. Christ is my holiness. You say, well, wait just a minute, preacher. You mean to tell me then that we ought not to try to live holy lives? And you know better than that. That's not what I'm saying at all. It may be that God may not use you if you're not holy, but I want to tell you something. If He does use you, it's not because you are holy. You can never say, it is my holiness. My holiness has gained me extra favors from God. And therefore, if you are not as holy as I am, then you don't have the same entree with God. It used to bug me to death when God blessed people I didn't approve of. All right, then if it's not by my holiness that my prayers are answered, if it's not by my holiness that the Spirit of God comes upon me, what's the motivation? Why should I be holy? Because He's holy. Did you know that the Bible only gives one and only one motivation for being holy? And He says, because I am holy. That's all. That's the only reason. You study over there in the book of Leviticus, those Levitical laws, and God says, I don't want you to sew these different kinds of material together, and I don't want you to drink milk when you eat meat, and I don't want you to do all those health laws. Have you ever noticed that God never gave them a good reason for doing that? You know, God could have said, now, if you'll do what I tell you to do, you won't have pimples, and you won't have sinus, and you'll live a long life, and you won't have heart disease and hardening of the arteries, because all those things are true. You can read this book, None of These Diseases, and it's established medical fact that all of those laws that God gave were for the welfare of those people. God never gave one of those as a reason. The only reason He gave is He said, because I am holy. Be ye holy because I am holy. And when people begin to try to determine whether something is right or wrong on the basis of whether or not it's harmful to us, they're missing the boat. I don't care if all the sociologists and medical doctors and psychiatrists in the world could prove that homosexuality was normal, natural, and healthy, it would still be wrong because God says it is. You see, a thing is not right or wrong because it's good or bad for us. That's not what makes a thing right or wrong. It's right or wrong because of God's nature. God's character is the standard of the Christian ethic. He says, I want you to do this because I'm holy. Why should I be holy? The motivation is not so that I'll be useful or so that God will answer my prayer. The motivation is you be holy because I am holy. I am holy. You never were worthy to be called His son. And I've got some good news for you, friend. Your sin hasn't made you a bit less holy than you were before. Second mistake that he made was this. He goes on, verse 19, and I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. Second and big mistake he made was he thought his sin had changed God's attitude towards him. Make me as one of thy hired servants. He said, I know, Father, you can never look upon me as you once did. I know that you can never quite treat me as you used to. I know that my sin has affected you, and my sin has created an unalterable change between us. And so, Father, just make me as one of thy hired servants. He thought that his sin was so powerful it could change his Father's heart. And you know, that's the part of the speech he never got to. Father interrupted him. Never he wanted to discuss it. He said, bring forth the best robe, put it on his shoulders and shoes on his feet and ring on his finger. This is my son. Listen, folks, I want to tell you something. Your sin hasn't changed God's attitude towards you one bit. God still loves us with an everlasting love. God has a fixed and established attitude towards me. There is only one way and one way only that God can ever think of me, and that is in terms of love and sonship. That's all. My sin doesn't change God. Where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. And by the way, those are two different words there. One says where sin did abound, grace just kept on abounding more and more and more. You're never going to drown out grace by your sin. My sin hasn't changed God. He said, I've loved you with an everlasting love. I'm talking with a fellow not long ago. We were over there in Romans chapter 9, 10, 11. Why anybody wants to get over there? I don't know, boy. He said, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. How in the world could God hate Esau? I said, easy. That's no problem. My problem is how he could love Jacob. Did you know that Jacob's name became a synonym for deceitfulness? For instance, over in Jeremiah 17:9, when it says the heart is deceitful above all things, do you know what he's really saying? The heart is a Jacob. That Hebrew word is the word for Jacob. The heart is a Jacob. Jacob was a trickster. Brother, when you're around him, you better keep your hands on your back pockets where you got your billfold. How in the world could God love Jacob? People say, I just can't believe in hell. I can. Have a hard time believing in heaven. I don't understand it. I don't even begin to comprehend it. But folks, I want to tell you something. My sin has not changed God's attitude towards me one whit. He has an established, fixed attitude towards me, and that is an attitude of love and grace. And there is nothing I can do that will ever change God's attitude towards me. He loves me. And this boy said, my father will no longer treat me as he once did. He was absolutely incorrect. He overestimated the power of his sin. The problem with most Christians today is they're more conscious of their guilt than they are of His grace. And I want to show you how this grace was exhibited. First of all, the Father always receives us just as we are. This boy came back, I guess he's fresh from the pig pen. Folks, have you ever been around pig pen? Sure you have. I know where you come from. Don't. Now, I want to tell you something. There is nothing any more aromatic than a pig pen. Friend, you can't wash it off. Lye soap won't get it all. Can you imagine what that boy must smell like? And to a Jew, the smell of a pig pen was even 100-fold worse. And one day in the late of the evening, the father may be sitting on the front porch after the meal, looks out and he sees that familiar walk, and he recognizes that boy. He says to his servants, "You go out there, and that's my son, and you go out there and you take him in the back door and get him cleaned up and get him a bath and everything and get him presentable, then I'll meet him." That's not what he said at all. And he jumped off that porch. That old man ran as fast as he could and threw his arms around that boy, pig smell and all, and began smothering with fishes, he said. He received him just as he was. "Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, O Lamb of God, I come." You say, "Well, I'm going to wait until I get victory over this thing." You'll never do it. "Well, I'm going to wait." I've had people tell me that. I've had them tell me that. I said, "As soon as I get this thing settled, then I feel like you know what they're saying? Then I feel like I have a right to come back to the Lord." You don't have a right to come back to Him one way or another. He receives us just as we are. I'll tell you what I like about the Lord. Over in James 1, he says, "If any man lack wisdom," you know, he said, you talk about you fall into divers tribulations, you get yourself in a mess, and actually it's many-colored. He said, "Boy, there's so many troubles you're into, you have to color them to tell one from the other." Color-coded trials. And he said, when you get in that situation, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. You come to God and you say, "Lord, I need some wisdom. I need to know how to get out of this mess." And he says, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. Do you know what that means? I'll tell you what that word upbraid means. It means that when I come to God and say, "Lord, I'm in a mess, and I just need some help to get out," God doesn't say, "All right, I'm going to give you the wisdom, but first of all, I want to tell you something. You should have known better than to get into that in the first place." He doesn't chide us. Some years ago, I was having some difficulties, and you know, folks, you get to a point, you really need to talk to somebody. You don't want any advice, you don't want any sermons, you want somebody to feel sorry for you. I'm very honest. You want to go to somebody and just have them to put their arm around and pat you on the shoulder and say, there, everything's going to be all right. That's what I want. I was hurting. And I had a close friend. I said, "I've got to talk to you." Now, this boy had never had any problems. He was one of those fellas, you know, just almost like a charmed life. He'd never had any problems. And I began to tell him all my troubles. Shook his head. He said, "Ron, how could you have been so stupid as to get into that mess?" It's the last time I ever went to him for a problem. I'm serious. I wouldn't go to him today. I'm very serious. I knew I was stupid for getting into that mess. What I was after was not somebody to preach me a sermon or give me 3 steps on how to cure depression. I didn't want them to give me a book on how to defeat the devil or anything like that. I just wanted them to put their arms around me and cry with me and say, "Boy, bless your heart. I've never heard anybody any worse shape than you are. Bless your heart." That's what I wanted. I'm serious. And you say, "Well, that's not spiritual." I don't care whether it is or not, friends. That's just the way we are. And God says, "You get in that mess and you come to me, I'll give you what you need, and I won't tell you. I won't say, 'I told you so.'" You know, sometimes when I go to people and ask them to forgive me, you know, they might say, "Well, all right." One more time. I've never heard that from God. Old Peter said, "Lord, how many times should I forgive a fellow?" And Peter thought he was really going some. He said, 7 times? Now to Peter, that was grace. See? Jesus said, "No, would you believe 70 times 7? Now, he wasn't saying, let's keep a record, and after I've forgiven you for the same thing 490 times, that's the end of it. What Jesus was saying is there's no limit. You don't count how many times you forgive somebody. He receives us just as we are. Second thing, He treats us as though we've never been away. When that boy left that day, he left with a pair of shoes, a nice coat, and a ring. Folks, when you get out there in the far country and you're broke, you have to hop those things. Father treated him as though he'd never been away. He said, bring forth the best robe. Now, I thought, well, maybe a robe, but not the best one. Don't you remember what this son did? No, I can't recollect what he did. Just seems as though he's never been away. Put shoes on his feet, put a ring on his finger, kill the fatted calf, call his friends, let's make merry. Did you know that everything that boy is looking for in the far country he found in the Father's house? And when he came and asked for nothing, he got everything. Now, I want to tell you something. I speak this to myself as much to you. I think the greatest attack that the enemy throws against us is to make us feel our own unworthiness. Say something. You can stand up here and smile and sing a holy song, but if I knew everything about your black heart, I wouldn't even want to be around you. I'm just going to be honest with you. If you knew everything about my old black heart, you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me preach tonight. God knows. You see, our trouble is we've created God in our own image. And we think God's like us. And when I know something bad about you, I'm disappointed in you, and it affects the way I feel about you. As a pastor, I'd have people come to me for counseling. Sometimes they'd tell me some deep, dark things, and within 6 months they'd move down some other church. Why? They couldn't face me after telling me that. You know why? They said, Pastor will be affected by what I've told him. He'll think less of me now that I've told him this. You know that's true. That's the way we are. We may not want to be that way, but folks, that's the way we are. Now, if I know something about you that's not good, I can't help it. But it's just going to color a little bit of the way I think of you. And so since we're that way, we create God in our own image. We say that's the way God is. I can't forgive completely and totally, then God cannot. Folks, that's not so at all. It's not so at all. Not so at all. He will receive you as you are, and He'll make you as though you've never been away. Would you bow your heads for a moment?